Okay, Tammy, I think we're ready when you are.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining. Thank you, Chris, for getting it all started. I just want to say, excuse me for my voice. Total apologies. I'm just getting over a cold. But I'm very excited about today's topic since this has been something that our organization has been dealing with, is trying to understand if we're going to start using MSP or not. So I'm so glad Rob is going to be presenting. The topic today is should your company use the MSP project connector with CA PPM? And I'm just going to give you a lit to bio on Rob Greca. He works for Rego Consulting, and also he's going to be joined by James Bonds with LabCorp. And yes, that's his name, James Bonds, and I love it. So Rob Greca has extensive PPM consulting and industry experience where he has led or assisted leaders through various strategic and transformation initiatives at all scales. With more than 15 years experience, Rob has broad industry exposure spanning technology, financial service, retail, utilities, and pharmaceuticals. Rob specializes in large-scale, enterprise-wide strategic transformations. And just to make it a little personal, in his spare time, Rob coaches and mentors kids through a club he created called the Innovators Lab to be better prepared for the 21st century workforce. The kids learn how to be creative and innovative through fun and exciting projects. Rob also enjoys spending time with his wife, 3 kids, 2 dogs, and 2 cats. That's a full house. So before I pass the baton over to Rob, I just want to talk a little bit about the user group, the New York, New Jersey chapter. If anybody's on the call and is looking forward to the annual event this year, we're not having one because I need someone to sponsor a location for us, and we have yet to get a sponsor. So I'm not sure if we're going to have one for the year 2017. If a miracle happens, I was sure to keep you posted. If you know of anyone who wants to sponsor a location, please have them email me. But without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Rob Greca. Rob?
Yeah, hi, Tammy. Thanks so much. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you perfectly. Oh, also in addition, Rob, before you start, if you want to stop in between and see if we have questions, we can do that. Everyone's going to be putting their questions in the Q&A chat, and I can give you a question or we can wait to the end. You let me know how you want to work it.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, no, I think that sounds great. Yeah, and I mean, I'm perfectly fine with, having this become more of a discussion. I do have a set of slides, but I'm, perfectly willing to go off script. I want people to get the value from this discussion. But let me just give everybody an idea of kind of my approach and what I thought was a valuable use of our time today. Like Tammy said, I've been working with CA PPM, helping organizations with PPM capabilities. Have done quite a bit with Microsoft Project. It's interesting in the past few years, even as we're seeing Agile practices pick up, I'm seeing more of a push for trying to get the Microsoft Project Connector working with CA PPM. And what I find that I'm often pulled in to kind of help with the mechanics, all right? And so it seems like the decision has usually been made. And what I often find is that the decision is really just been more of a gut, decision. That, yeah, we've been hearing from our Microsoft Project users. They just want to, they want to continue to use Microsoft Project and have it get fed into CA PPM. So I see that quite a bit. And then I also, on the other side, where I think the Microsoft Project Connector would really value or provide value for organizations, I've seen, PMO directors just say, you know what, we're just not going to use it. I don't want to go through that hassle. So I really want to focus today on, what are the important factors to consider before your organization goes down this path of implementing, deploying, doing some training on Microsoft Project with a connector. Because as you're going to see, there are some nuances. There are some things that the project managers are going to need to understand. So it's not a install and one and done, and we're all connected and everybody's happy. You'll see that there are some other strategic factors that we need to talk through. Okay. I'm also joined by James. So James and I have been working together for oh, geez, I think the past year and a half. So LabCorp is, I would say, a pretty innovative organization when it comes to rolling out PPM capabilities and really using the tool to, gain some insight. We've done stuff around predictive analytics inside the tool, and so it's pretty amazing. They have a very innovative approach, and James is going to join and just give his thoughts about how his organization has taken advantage of the connector. All right, so let me just, so here's the outline. So we'll just talk about, again, just why do we want to use the connector? So what are, the typical use cases? I have some thoughts on that. Then I think the meat of this is going to be the important factors to consider, all right? And I think these are the things that every organization needs to go through before making that final decision. Then we'll turn it over to James, have him talk about his experiences. I can also talk about, where I've seen this done well, and where I've seen people, make some mistakes. And, I want all of you to avoid those mistakes. And then at the very end, if your organization has already made the decision, which is perfectly fine, then let's talk about what a plan for moving forward looks like. So I'll give you some, ideas of estimates, certain activities, and then I'll give you some more information. So at the last few slides I have, if anybody is really interested in getting into some of the details, about fields, attributes, methods, I'm going to give you a bunch of information for that. Okay. All right. So let's get into this. So first of all, I do have to say that I think CA has done a great job with the connector, and in particular the latest XML connector. If anybody has used the old driver, would often take, it could take up to like a minute just to download and open the schedule in Microsoft Project. The XML connector is very, very fast, very speedy. So when you do use this connector, you do have full bidirectional data flow between CA PPM and Microsoft Project. So it's great, but as you're going to see, there are some drawbacks to that, and it's typically because of a project manager's maturity level. Okay, so I'd often see that the greatest use case for this is if your organization is struggling with adoption, and in particular, it's the important part of adoption is having the adoption of your project manager. So I'll often tell my clients that the glue that really holds everything together with these capabilities is your project managers. I mean, think about, if we want to use CA PPM for better resource management, better portfolio management, all of that data goes back to the project. And if our project managers aren't feeling like they're getting the value from it, then that data is going to suffer. So definitely want to make sure to address that. And this connector is a good way to go about doing that. Often another common use case is, well, we took a look at Workbench, and for those of you that don't know this, Workbench is the native scheduling application. It's Workbench was actually developed at the same time as Microsoft Project, all the way back in 1984. All right, it wasn't developed by CA; it was developed by a previous company. CA had acquired it at some point. So it is a very capable scheduling tool, but I'm sure those of you who've seen that, and typically the first reaction is, well, this is kind of hard. Workbench is kind of hard to use, especially for people that are familiar with Microsoft Project. I find that the advanced Microsoft Project users are going to struggle with, making the leap to using Workbench. So, oftentimes the use case is, well, people are struggling with Workbench. We want to give them the tools that they're most familiar with, make them successful. So how can we use the connector to make that happen? Okay. And I think the last thing there is, as like I mentioned about Agile, as much as there is a push to Agile, I don't think that we're going to see Microsoft Project go away anytime soon. I mean, it's just a de facto standard. Most people are going to be using it. That's one of the first tools that project managers use. So it's something that we have to address and we have to think through. Okay. And Tammy, you could go ahead and interrupt me if any questions come in. All right. So the first thing, the first thing that, this very simple slide, but I think it's a very important slide, all right? And it's not just, doesn't just have to do with a connector, but, oftentimes this is the first thing I'll tell my client is, all right, we believe that deploying this software, building these processes, going through the organizational change is going to give us a set of benefits, all right? Well, all of that is a hypothesis, all right? We believe that doing that is going to get us to certain values, certain benefits. We need to think of it from this more scientific perspective, or really this goes back to Deming, the plan, do, check, act process. So by doing this, we're going to get some value. Well, hopefully we have some metrics. Hopefully we're going to be able to measure that. And, hopefully we have the mindset so that if we are not getting the expected benefits, or, if we're running into issues, how are we going to adjust? Do we have the ability to adapt? So again, going back to a lot of the use cases that I usually jump into is, the decision has already been made. All right, we have to make it work. Well, as you're going to see with the approach, we go through a pilot. We're getting some feedback from the users. They, either they don't like it, or there's some struggle. How are we going to respond? So the real important thing is that this is we have made a hypothesis, and we want to make sure that we're measuring and we are responding and we're being agile. All right, so I think that's and then again, going back to why are we using the connector? Is it a scheduling issue? Let me give you an example of a client that tried to do this, and through just over-engineering and over-complicating it, they really just took away the value and the benefits from the project managers. All right, so this is a major bank. All right, they're like, yep, our PMs tried to use Workbench. They weren't happy with Workbench, so we wanted to allow them to use Microsoft Project. All right, so perfectly fine. I helped them through that. We did some training. We showed them what it takes to make the connector work and the settings in Microsoft Project. But then the requirements, kept coming in. So now finance had some requirements. Well, we only want these certain tasks to be what people can charge time against. So how can we lock those down? I want to lock those down. All right, well, there's some techniques, and it's not simple to do that, but we started looking at, all right, well, what are the possibilities? How can we make that happen? All right, well, we want, and then they also wanted some templates. All right, here are the templates. If you're a waterfall project, then you have to use this template. If you're an agile project, you have to use this template. By the time we got through all of that, we had this, kind of this, Frankenstein schedule. Well, maybe Frankenstein isn't. It was really a rigid template. And we all know that, their project management is both an art and a science. So we took away all of the art. We took away all of the flexibility for the project managers to manage the project the way that they had to, the way that they were comfortable with, the way that matched their style. All right, and I see this all the time. Everybody has a different approach to their schedule. And so in the end, it was just, it was not something that was usable for them. So they had to go back to the drawing board and think through it. And they're still going through that, trying to figure out what's the best scheduler for their organization to use. But, as we got through this, I just, I flat out told them, I said that you are just taking away the value and the benefits for the project managers with this connector, and it's not a good thing. We're putting this at risk, okay? So what is your hypothesis? Is this about scheduling? Is it about financial control? All right, so we do need to put the needs of the project managers first when we're thinking about this connector. All right, so hopefully that made sense. All right, so now let's get into some of the meat of it. So what do we need to think about? So is it as simple as just deploying the connector, getting it installed, and then everybody can just use Microsoft Project the way that they're used to and have it fed? Well, here's a couple things. So the first thing I want to talk about is, the project scheduling does not equal project management. So I often find that one of the main use cases is we got a bunch of project managers. They're used to, Microsoft Project. They just want to get it connected. And they're struggling with adoption. They think that they can't use the tool to get their job done. And the first thing that we'll talk about is, all right, we're only talking about one project management capability, or to use the PMBOK term, one knowledge area. In fact, we could argue that, a schedule covers, scope, time, and cost, maybe some resources. But just to simplify, if you looked at the PMBOK, it's the time knowledge area. All right, and I, what I often take them through is, look, we're not deploying a tool like CA PPM only for scheduling capabilities. All right, we're trying to get better at managing our portfolio, making sure that we're doing the right investments, we're doing them well. We want to understand resource capacity across, multiple projects, not just one project. There is a broader vision here. And so the first thing we probably need to do is rather than just responding and reacting to PMs, being upset about, project scheduling, is are we all on the same page about the overall goal and objectives of this effort? Is it just about scheduling, or is it about, the capacity, the communication, being able to, create reports and understand holistically what's happening in the portfolio? All right, so that's the first, and I think that's an important discussion to have, okay? The next thing is, all right, so let's say we'd like to explore the connector, all right? Well, let's talk about what are the things that PMs are going to have to do differently, all right? And the first thing, one of the first few questions that I will often ask in an organization when I talk to the PMs is, I try to gauge their use of Microsoft Project. So are they basic users? Are they advanced users? There's usually a couple of questions that I'll ask. I'll ask, first of all, do you know what the Microsoft Project work formula is? More often than not, nobody, the PMs don't really know what that is. Then I'll ask things like, what's the difference between duration and effort? Sometimes, more often than not, I'll get some blank stares. I've even gone into organizations where they're going to be using the connector, and people are asking me, well, what is a milestone, really? Or what is a baseline? And so when I hear things like that, I know we're gonna have some struggles, because using the connector is bringing the maturity level up of your project managers to do better scheduling and really use some of these more intermediate to advanced techniques of scheduling theory. All right, so let me give you an idea of what some of those look like. So first of all, the PMs are now going to need to understand in Microsoft Project, all right, they have to do things a little differently. All right, so first of all, there are some global settings in Microsoft Project that need to be set. Now this, I typically do this, during a rollout during training. I'll, just take people through, making sure that they have the right settings. I have seen some organizations that create an image and roll that out to people's, laptops or desktops. It's usually a little bit more involved, but the training approach is usually the, most efficient way to get this going. So, there's, about a handful or a dozen settings that are important to select inside of Microsoft Project. So things like making sure the first day of the work week is set and it's matching CA PPM. Other things like, the duration is entered in days. All right, so as you know, that's the most common denominator unit in CA PPM, so we want to make sure that those things match. And then there's another handful, and you guys will have links to some of these documents that will show you screenshots and what these things look like. Okay. Then they're also going to need to know to avoid doing things like putting values in some of these text fields or the flag fields or the number fields. All right, so the Microsoft Project CA PPM connector is going to use some of these fields to communicate back and forth. All right, text 3 is an important one. That you definitely don't want to touch that one. If you open up text 3 on a project that's been open from CA PPM, you're going to see, it looks like a bunch of gobbledygook. That's important code that the tool needs to understand and communicate back and forth. There's some other text values, other flag values. You can also map the fields from Microsoft Project to CA PPM. So not every single Microsoft Project field is mapped to an attribute in CA PPM. What's nice, and I can't remember, I don't know if it was 14, I think it might have been 14.3, where they made the ability to do that mapping through the interface. That was really nice. Usually when you had to map those fields, you had to do that. That was a database thing a more technical resource would have to do. But now you could do that through the interface. Real nice. But the thing is, the PMs need to make sure not to use those fields or delete any of those values. Okay. Like I said, not all the fields in Microsoft Project are mapped to CA PPM. However, that doesn't mean that those values will disappear when they save back to CA PPM. So a little technical. What happens is if you're using the latest connector, which is the XML connector, it's going to generate an XML file of the schedule. And if you've used like text 22 or text 23 in Microsoft Project, that value will be stored in CA PPM. It's not linked to any attributes, so it won't show up through the CA PPM interface. But the next time you pull that project down into Microsoft Project, that value will be there. Okay. Another thing that I see with mapping that you'll want to be careful with, and this goes back to some of the advanced users. So I've worked with some companies where their advanced users are doing things like they are setting up formulas in certain fields. So for example, they might have a text, they might be using text 15, and their formula is if the finish date is not equal to the baseline finish date, do some sort of calculation. All right, those calculations aren't stored. The values, the resulting values, get added to the XML and saved into Clarity, but when they come back down, you've lost those formulas. Now, there is a way to retain those formulas, but it gets a little involved, and if anybody's interested, I could talk about what that looks like. All right, so other things, so you can't create resources manually in Microsoft Project. Now, often in the training, it's a pretty simple thing. Everybody gets that. Yep, I'm not going to go to my resource sheet in Microsoft Project and create a new resource. Where I see people running into issues is if they're, quickly editing, a Gantt view, they tab over into the resource initials field, and they think that they're typing RG for Rob Greca, but they type RT. So what Microsoft does is it just assumes, okay, well, I don't know the resource RT, so I'm going to generate a resource. All right, so Microsoft Project will create a resource when you try to save the file back. Luckily, you do get an error message, and that the error messages have gotten great over the years. So it'll say, cannot find resource RT, and it just won't save. It'll prevent you from saving back to CA PPM. So you'll have to fix that. And then I think the last thing, and this is a little bit more technical, but when you are using the XML connector, what I've found trips people up is they're used to, saving the MPP file from Microsoft Project, sending it to another user. That other user opens it up. They have all of the custom views that first user had created. Well, that's gonna be a little different in this experience because you are transferring XML data back and forth between CA PPM and Microsoft Project. Now, there is supposed to be the ability in Microsoft Project to, pull an MPP file or pull an XML file and append it to the Microsoft Project, but there is a bug that Microsoft acknowledged, and they just don't seem to be in a rush to trying to resolve that. So CA has had to work around that, and they've been able to do that. So it just causes a difference in how people set up their custom views, and that's something that I cover in training. Okay. Any questions? It looks like we have. Does Art have a question? Tammy, are we able to give the mic or open the mic up to people, or?
They can unmute, but we want to keep it to the Q&A. There was a question, but I think it's more product related, and I think someone from the product team should answer it. But I'm just going to present it to you so you're aware. So Joshua Collins says, does CA/IT design have any plans for major updates to the workbench? If you heard anything, you can respond. If not, we can leave it up to the CA product team. Or if the CA product team is on the line, they can better answer that after the presentation.
Yep. Yeah, I don't know if anyone from CA is on that can field that, but I have asked that question, and I've asked that question to IT design as well. I haven't heard of anything, and so yeah, I think we have to leave it at that.
Okay. We do have another question from. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Chris.
Oh, I was just going to say I did respond to Joshua. That looks like a roadmap question that he'd probably want to address with his account team and get more information from them.
Okay, thank you. We do have a question from Lisa Potter. What is the Microsoft bug just mentioned? Can you elaborate?
This is the ability to merge XML data into an MPP file. All right, so ideally what we'd like to do is we'd like to, have a local MPP file, and the XML data that's open from CA PPM would just merge with that MPP file, and that would allow us to keep, our custom views, custom attribute, custom naming attributes, and accept that. Because that bug or that appending of the XML data does not work effectively, what's happening is every time you're opening up the XML file from CA PPM, you are essentially creating, you're creating a new project, all right? And Microsoft Project is going through, and it is trying to recalculate based on the scheduling rules that you've put that in there. So that is something where, through training, we have to make, I make people aware of that. It's, and what we often see is that, when you create a plan, a couple of round trips from Microsoft Project to CA PPM and back and forth usually resolves any of those scheduling issues. But yeah, that's it is something that, tends to trip people up initially, but once you have the settings set up, that gets pretty, it gets relatively stable. So that's a good question. Okay.
That's it so far.
All right, good questions. All right, so let me move on to, let's see. All right, 7. Okay, and then other things that we talk about. So, some other do's and don'ts, and we have some good. And you'll see that, I'm going to send you to a file that has about there's 100 slides in it, and it talks about, the do's and don'ts and tips and tricks. But here's where the PMs need to, be a little bit more aware of things. So when you're working in your schedule, Microsoft Project allows you to assign resources to summary level tasks. All right. Now, the PMI purists would say, why would you do that? That shouldn't be allowed. Some scheduling theory purists would say, yeah, that doesn't make sense. You need to get down to the work package level and assign a resource. Well, Microsoft Project allows that. Problem is CA PPM doesn't allow it, all right? And you will get an error if there is a summary level task assignment when saving back to CA PPM. And I can't remember offhand what the error looks like. I think it gives you the task ID. So you could search for the task ID, and you could quickly find that. In training, what I will often show people is to use like the different show different levels in Microsoft Project. There's a button that allows you to show level 1, all level 1 tasks, all level 2 tasks, level 3 tasks. And I will often go down through that and just make sure that there are no resource assignments, or there's no resources showing up in that column. So, you know, but it's something that people need to be aware of. Now, again, in training, everybody's like, oh, I perfectly understand that. But in practice, what happens is if you are changing your structure, your WBS structure, you know, let's say you had a lower level task, the lowest level task, and you had assignment, you put Rob onto that assignment. If you create if you insert a task underneath that, indent that task, that first task that I just talked about is now a summary level task assignment. All right, so Microsoft Project allows you to do that, but CA PPM, that goes against the business rules. So you need to, you know, you just need to think about things like that. There's also, you know, things that you need to do in a certain order, so marking a task complete. So this, you know, definitely comes into play if you're using actuals and especially with resources assignments. So you need to make sure that, you know, if you have resources, if your plan is set up so that it's going to be pulling actuals, PPM is the track mode for time tracking. Then if you have assigned a resource to a task in Microsoft Project, you guys can try this, you know, even in a standalone Microsoft Project. If you mark that task with an assignment as 100% complete, Microsoft Project is going to be keeping its formulas whole, and it's going to throw actual values in the actual work column. All right. If you try to save that back to Clarity, Clarity is going to be, well, and I will go back and forth between Clarity and CA PPM. Those are equal terms, just in case you don't know. It's been 15 years, so it's hard to break that habit. So you save that one task where you have created actuals in Microsoft Project, you save it back to Clarity. Clarity's like, hey, I haven't seen these actuals come through Clarity, a Clarity timesheet, so I'm going to ignore them. And in fact, it just discards them. So the next time you open that project in Microsoft Project, you are going to see those values. And I believe that the behavior is that project goes back to incomplete. I'm pretty sure. Yeah, you have to test that. But it's going to give you unexpected behavior, all right, and that's usually something that trips up most people. So there are some ways of getting around that, but again, I think those ways of getting around it are a little, probably more complex for the PMs. I just won't get into it just now, but you know, keep in mind there are other things like that, and this document that I'll share with you, we'll talk through those. So I think a couple of, uniform loading pattern is highly recommended. So, you know, again, I often say if the PMs are at this level where they're changing the loading patterns, then, you know, you have different algorithms working together, and you could be experiencing some discrepancies. So if you could switch, or if you could stick to uniform loading, you're probably going to be in good shape. And then, the last one is just what field maps to the loading pattern between the two tools. All right, so that's just, I mean, that's a subset, but yep. Mm-hmm.
Oh, we have a couple of things here, just two.
All right, good.
So
good.
Ken Cooperberg, he says, definitely interested in this topic. We have users who have customized their views. Hold on one second. We have users who customize their views, and we're looking for a solution. Otherwise, we'll have to stick with the legacy connector. So that was his comment, and I have another one.
Yeah, so Ken, good question. What you want to do is you need to train your users on how to make sure that those views are saved to their global MPT file. All right, that's the Microsoft Project template file. There is a setting in Microsoft Project that if you create some renamings of attributes, if you create new views, new tables, that stuff will automatically show up in that user's global MPT. What you have to train them on is if they've done that, just because they open the file, just because they open the schedule again from CA PPM, does not mean that view that they last used is going to show up automatically. They might have to select that view from their global MPT file. All right.
Okay.
So I wish there was a better solution, but this, again, that goes back to the XML merge issue.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And Dale Stockman, he says, understand that with CA PPM 15.2, must use MSP 2016. Also, where projects are run poorly, with tens of thousands of assignments on a single task. XML download locks up. Classic version still works, but slowly.
Yeah, yeah. So the size of the file, and we have seen this. In fact, the talk that I gave with Shannon Toke from CA at CA World, we did talk about there are some best practices about, you could go deep, pretty deep in your project. You could go wide in your project, meaning you could have pretty extensive WBS, but try not to go wide and deep. But yeah, this gets to if you're starting to run into issues with the size of your files, if you have 10,000 tasks and above and things like that, then we might need to consider whether we break up those projects into sub-projects. I'm afraid there's not a good, there's not a perfect solution for that, but good point. Okay. None of this is going to be perfect. Yeah, and maybe the important thing is, again, none of this is going to be perfect. All right, this is CA had to get two different tools, two different scheduling algorithms to work together. You could imagine that Microsoft isn't necessarily going to be cooperative, and they're not going to enjoy working with CA to try to work through these issues. There are some challenges to get through, and that's why I thought this talk is really important. Okay. Was there something else, Tammy?
Yeah, he just had an add-on. He says open workbench still works faster in such poorly run projects. Yeah.
So yeah, if you are concerned about that, yeah, Workbench, even though people don't like the UI, I think if they get beyond the user interface, I think it's that integration is so much tighter and so much easier to deal with. Okay, I know we're getting close to the time. Let me cover this, and then what I'm going to probably do is pull James in to talk through some of the LabCorp experiences. But this is just kind of a visualization on the different types of users. So I think where I tend to struggle with is, at the extreme ends of the experience with Microsoft projects. So the basic schedulers, all right, they're usually, they're great to work with. The training usually goes smoothly. They're like, oh yeah, okay, that, I understand this, and because they're not used to using any of the more complex features of Microsoft projects, so they're perfectly fine with some of these topics that we've been working with. It's a challenge for them because they need to have a better understanding of just scheduling theory. All right, we are, especially if we're pulling actuals, they need to know things like the work formula. Difference between duration and effort and how those things impact your schedule. All right, so that group, the basic group, usually struggles. And then the advanced schedulers, while they have the knowledge, they just are, it's just more of a, it's a change issue. They're, concerned because, well, now that they have to use their custom views, the global MPT file, they got to take a couple of extra steps. Maybe those formulas aren't going to necessarily work out quite well. So that group, and it's pretty difficult to get through a training session with that group. So I find that the group that this works really well for is this group in between. All right, they're not perfectly married to how they've been doing things in Microsoft Project, but they're not basic users. So I think that's the if you have that group, your deployment is going to go so much more smoother. Okay. So, yeah, we talked about Workbench. I won't get into Agile, but let's just talk about some case studies. So, James, are you on the line?
I am.
All right. Hey, James. So,
hello.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
All right. Cool.
Sure.
All right. Yeah. So, James, I guess just to kind of key it up, I think the your boss, Paul, I think made a pretty good call, for you guys using, the Microsoft Project Connector. It's, he had certain constraints. There were certain things from a financial perspective that needed to be put in place, and you guys did use templates, but you didn't go overboard with the templates. had very simple templates, but you allowed the flexibility to, for the project managers and to manage the projects that they felt most comfortable with. So do you want to just talk about, your experiences and any of the feedback you got from the PMs?
Yeah, so basically what we started with was some templates and gave our project managers the capability to integrate with MSP and be able to add tasks and stuff like that as they wanted to, but we also had we had to kind of restrict them in some respects so we can make sure that they adhere to certain phases and things like that, so we could get exact better information out of the system with regards to tasks and things like that. And then we're also looking at capacity from a different perspective than using Microsoft Project. Microsoft Project is more for we're going to be using to create and add people to tasks and things like that.
Yep.
So they can.
Yeah, just to touch on one thing that you were talking about. Just so, if anybody has any concerns, or if you'd like to, hear some more information. So LabCorp, what James was referring to is that they needed to appropriately capitalize tasks. And so what we did at Rego is we built a process that would run on a nightly basis so that, the template would show, okay, the design phase is an operating task, but the build phase is a capital, set of tasks. All right. So all of if the PM has the flexibility to create, a substructure of tasks within each of those phases, but the PM doesn't have to be concerned about labeling the tasks appropriately with the appropriate cost type field. The process that we built that runs on a nightly basis will automatically distribute the appropriate cost type attribute down through that phase. So it was a great solution because it took, it took the need away from the PMs to maintain that information while giving us the control. So I think that was a good approach.
And then we also have a way to check to make sure that the PMs are still when they add any new tasks, that they make sure that they're adding them under one of those phases so that process can recognize it and label it appropriately also.
Yep. Mhm. Yep. Yes, we have some good views. Yep. Mhm. Yeah. What kind of feedback have you gotten from the PMs?
Well, it's been pretty simple. They've had some good things. Some people like it, some people don't. With the project management connector, there's a couple drawbacks with if you want to assign somebody outside of Clarity, you can't. Like if you want to assign a generic task, like a generic user, like somebody like a business owner or something like that, unless they're in Clarity, you're not able to assign them to that task in MSP. But other than that, not many people have had many issues with it. It's just basic templates, and they just work off that, and they've not really had problems. I mean, some other people have had some concerns because you're always going to have those projects that aren't going to really map to those templates, like certain ones like infrastructure usually has its own way of doing things. Most of it, you want to develop it around the majority of the projects, though, versus software or something like that.
Yeah. That's a good point, James. I didn't bring that up, but I think it's worth mentioning. I've had people where they're designing for the 1% of the PM population. All right, and that's I don't think that's the wisest move. I mean, it could be case by case, but you want to be designing this for the majority of your PM population. If you have like the Microsoft Project Advanced Extreme users, then you might need to think about a different approach for them specifically. But, are you designing this for, the 80% of the population? It's a good point. All right.
We have a couple of questions here.
Okay.
If you want. Okay. So
yeah, go ahead.
Thorsten, he states, if I export a project from CA PPM 15.2 into MSP, only one predecessor per task is taken to MSP. The others are lost. The import from MSP to CA PPM works fine. What could cause this?
Okay, that's an issue I have not heard of. So I think that's definitely a ticket to CA.
Yeah, we've never had that issue either.
Yeah.
Okay, and we have Chris Flynn. Is there one good document we can use that will steer us in the right direction that summarizes all the things we need to watch out for?
Yeah. Well, and I think I've been asked that question. Is there just a one-pager? Well, unfortunately, there are so many different aspects to this. I think a couple of documents that I'll have later in this, at Rego University, in fact, we just had a training on using MSP. So that's the document I'm going to refer you to. So I think it's about 80 or 90 pages. And then I'll show you how to get connected with me too. I do have some other files that I've put together that might be helpful. But yeah, I wish there was just a nice summary. But hopefully I have something that would help out.
Well, if you can
definitely reach out to me.
I can upload it to the user community, and then this way everyone can get it. So that would be great.
Yeah. Yeah, and Tammy, it's probably all the stuff that I think I sent you.
Okay. Well, all right. I will surely upload that. That's no problem.
Yeah.
Then it says here, Doug, we had an experience where every time the project was open in MSP, it would reschedule the project. How have you worked around this?
So I think that sounds like what I was talking about with the XML driver. Because of that Microsoft bug, the project is going to have to be rescheduled. It's going to be scheduled each time it's open, that the XML comes into Microsoft Project. One way that you can get around this is in Microsoft Project, every task can be automatically scheduled or it could be manually scheduled. So by setting the global settings in Microsoft Project to make sure that your tasks are manually scheduled by default, that's one way to make Microsoft Project more like Workbench. And if you didn't know, Workbench just automatically doesn't move things around until you use auto schedule. So that would be my suggestion. Set everything to manually schedule. But then, again, there are drawbacks now. Now the PMs have to, take more action in their Microsoft Project plan to schedule things. Another good question.
If a PM, Katie Sears, question, if a PM wants to use a different loading pattern, example, fixed, where is the best place to change the loading pattern, MSP or CA PPM? If there are conflict between the loading pattern default set in CA PPM, uniform, if PMs change the contour in MSP?
And that I haven't done a whole lot of testing on, or I think it's been a while since I've really tested it. But what I'd say is if you could set those loading patterns in CA PPM, you're probably going to be in better shape. And I think if you set it in CA PPM and then you change it in Microsoft Project, that's probably going to introduce some conflicting information.
Okay, one more from Jeff. High level. If the decision is made not to use the connector, are there recommended workflows PM can follow to avoid double data entry of tasks/milestones in Microsoft Project or Workbench and CA PPM? Just looking for other options.
Yeah. I don't know if there's really good I don't know if there's a really good solution. I think another thing that I'd throw out there, I know for one telecommunications company, we built an Excel adapter, and so people kept, and amazingly, Microsoft Excel is probably the most common scheduler, project scheduler, even more so than Microsoft Project. So that's something else you can do. Outside of that, if somebody wants to manage a detailed schedule and not have it connected to CA PPM, then yeah, I think you might have some of that dual entry. But typically what you do is the stuff that's in CA PPM is the high level. It's the major phases or milestones that the PM needs to keep up to date. But they can use their offline detailed schedule, which I find a lot of people do anyway. They're going to manage their offline project schedule. So, I don't think there's an easy answer to that question.
That's all the questions that we have in the chat. But for myself, since we are doing an MSP evaluation, and Rob's helped us a lot with some of our issues, I think we can talk a little bit about some recommendations for piloting. We actually spent, I want to say 6 to 8 months just trying to pilot here at Montefiore IT, not pilot, but evaluate if we're going to use it or not. And then the next step is just to pilot one project, but make sure it's just not one of these high-profile projects for this pilot. So that's what our approach for this evaluation is going to be. So I don't know if you have something to add on to that.
Yeah, this is this slide I'm showing the action plan. This is typically what I recommend. So the first thing you're going to want to do, and I think this is a key success factor, is establish that internal point of contact. So who is that person that not only is going to drive this, but is also going to be intimately familiar and comfortable with how the connector works, all these factors that we've been talking about. So a major hospital that I worked with, they had this person. This person was the PM, and he was also very skilled at Microsoft Project. And so as we went through the pilot, he began to understand all of the different factors, and he could communicate that in terms that organization understood to their PMs. And that's an important thing. The next thing is the installation script. So there are some different components that need to be installed on each individual workstation. So you got to get the right Java version, you got to get the right bit version. There's things like the .NET framework, the Microsoft add-in. Those pieces of software need to be in place. And so I often find that it takes about a week or two, and trying to get the install working on some users' machines. That's an important step. So get that installation script down. Then piloting, the time frame could be, it really depends. Is this an enterprise rollout? Is it one group? I think my experience has been, like 1 to 2 months, I think, is going to give you a good indication. You want to give people an idea to go through a couple status reporting cycles to get a feel for how this is working, and then have that go, no-go decision. So, again, this comes back to the hypothesis, all right? So, yep, we thought, giving the ability for people to connect with Microsoft Project would enhance or encourage adoption, and so what are the results? And then after that, then the deploy, the train. So I put deploy, train, monitor, and coach. So I think once you deploy, the training is great, but what I find is most people, really benefit from coaching. So ideally, it's that subject matter expert above that we've identified is going to be the coach. And are you going to do this a wave rollout or a big bang? I would always encourage wave if that's possible over big bang, because again, it's going to come back to the coaching and the high touch support. Okay. So yeah, here is a couple of the just how to get more info, and I think Tammy has all of this. If not, I'll make sure that she has this. There's a Microsoft presentation from CA World to the CA documentation wiki. He's got a lot of great information. If you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, I just posted an article that really goes into some of these concepts in a little bit more detail. So, feel free to, check out my profile. And, yeah, I think that's it. All right, got a couple minutes to spare. Any other last questions?
There's no other last questions, but I definitely want to thank you, Rob and James, for presenting. And I think what we can do is, since this is being recorded, and the recording will be available probably early next week, what I like to do is package the post of the recording and the documentations all together. So this way it's in one thread, and people can, go to one spot to get it, if that makes sense.
Oh, yeah. Yep. And it sounds like your voice has improved since the beginning of the session, so.
I know, I've been drinking water, though, water. So I want to thank everyone for joining in the call. And if you have any questions, you got Rob's information. He's been fantastic, even with helping us here at Montefiore IT. And are you available in the user community, Rob? Do you have a login for that?
Yep. Oh, yeah, I do.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, great. Okay, so he's available there as well. And if anybody has any other questions, that you can contact me. I can send it to Rob or contact Rob directly. But thanks again, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your weekend.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, James.
My pleasure.